Hi everybody, I'm Haley Snyder, and today I'm here with one of our writers, Rafaella Gunz.
Hi.
And she wrote an article last week about cyberbullying and some legislation that a Republican senator actually proposed here in New York. So tell me about what that bill does, Rafi.
The bill is trying to prohibit cyberbullying amongst minors, especially in public schools in New York State. As you know, I'm sure many of you know, cyberbullying has become a real problem, especially among youth, and especially amongst like LGBT youth. Oftentimes they will commit or try to commit suicide because of cyberbullying. So surprisingly, a group of mostly Republican senators got together and created this bill which will make cyberbullying a minor a misdemeanor, which is prohibited by a $100,000 fine or up to a year in prison. So it's definitely a step forward in terms of cyberbullying legislation, because you know it is putting a punishment to the crime. However, there is some sort of discussion and debate of how effective this bill will actually be.
Yeah, so in your article, you talk about some of your own experiences with cyberbullying. Do you want to address those experiences?
Okay, yeah, so I, grew up on the internet, as most of us millennials have, and when I was in high school, sites such as Formspring and Ask.fm existed where users could anonymously send questions and comments to others. I got a death threat. I just remember this today. When I was a junior in high school, a girl who was a grade above me sent me a death threat on Formspring, a legitimate death threat, saying like the world would be a better place if I died. It's not a threat, it's a promise. I remember the cops coming over. They couldn't do anything because there was no like real proof that the comments were connected or in any way or anything like that. And I only found out it was this girl because a mutual friend told me. So nothing really happened, and then that's just one example of that. More recently, I was harassed by like anti-social justice warriors. They don't like me because I'm a feminist and I talk about having herpes and my sex life, so they don't like me. And they contacted my school, my mom, to say I was suicidal, which I wasn't. They pretended to be a concerned friend. They tried to dox me on 8chan. They made YouTube videos about me, just tons of horrible stuff. And I went to the police twice and filed 2 reports for aggravated harassment, and nothing came of them. They kept the reports, but they said there was nothing they could do because there's no explicit threat or whatever. So the reports, I guess, are still on file and no one has investigated it. Thankfully, the harassment has died down. It was kind of on and off from January till about April of last year, and thankfully it stopped for the most part. But I was reached out to by a recruiter from Critical Content, and Critical Content is the production agency that does Catfish, the TV show, and they're looking to do a new TV show where harassers meet with their victims in real life, and I was reached out to be on it, but then I just realized that's a horrible idea. Like with Catfish, the people actually like each other. Like I don't want to meet people who've harassed me online in person. And also though, I found postings and ads on like Craigslist of the way they were framing it to the bullies. And they were framing it as like, oh, are you sick of fake gamer girls and like all these social justice warriors, and come in our show and we'll like exploit them for you type of thing. So I just didn't really feel safe or comfortable sort of being put out that way. So I actually wrote a piece for Bust Magazine about it and started a change.org petition to MTV and Viacom to not pick up this show, which is called Beyond the Keyboard. After the video, we will link it in the comments below if you're interested in reading more about it and signing it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting issue because, people might look at you and say, well, you're like a seriously strong individual, you can support yourself and stand up to bullies, but, maybe there are younger kids, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds who are dealing with the same type of cyber harassment, who may not be able to just roll off comments like that.
Yeah.
But we do have a lot of questions for you from comments on our Daily Clout page. So, a group member named Whitfield Palmer commented on Naomi's page, and he said, "Banning cyberbullying is putting a bandage on the problem. Resilience training addresses the problem." So what do you think about that? Do you think resilience training is a better solution than legalizing cyberbullying?
I mean, well, first of all, especially in terms of this bill, it's addressed at minors and, young adults, teenagers, adolescents. They're still developing, they're very sensitive, very hormonal, so it's, they're not, fully self-actualized yet as adults. So to say that, like, oh, well, they should just, be taught how to have thicker skin doesn't really help. I think we should just teach people to not be hateful towards each other online. I feel like that's a better solution at the end of the day. That is the wound that we're really addressing, and to be like, oh, we'll just toughen up and get over it is another band-aid over the wound that doesn't really address the problem.
Another person commented on the Daily Clout page and brought up the issue of how short sentences, especially with misdemeanors, often don't resolve these problems. Do you think that this bill, given that it only charges the criminals with 1-year sentences for an act of cyberbullying against a minor, will still be effective in deterring future acts of cyberbullying?
I mean, at the end of the day, probably not. Like with rape cases, for instance, a lot of times the perpetrators don't get the punishment they deserve, and it doesn't, stop rape. But at the same time, this is still a step in the right direction in terms of putting a punishment to the crime instead of just sort of, like my experience with the police officers not really knowing or understanding what to do in these situations. So at least there might be a law on the book that, like, this type of harassment equals, this sort of punishment.
So for you, it's not just about creating some sort of criminal charge, but trying to get people to culturally start recognizing this as something that should be deterred.
Yeah, because, even if you have a misdemeanor on your record, it's still on your record. Even if you didn't pay the $100,000 fine or go to prison for a year, it's still something that you're not going to be proud of.
So, another member of our Daily Clout community, John Montgomery, argued that with so much of our lives on the internet nowadays in 2017, and with so much of that internet activity being anonymous, he believes that it is impossible to get rid of online harassment, that harassment is actually inevitable in an online world. So to somebody like John who shares his beliefs, what would you say to somebody who might think that you should just stay offline or choose to not read the comments?
Well, first of all, a lot of the time it's not just the comment sections of articles that you may write or see. A lot of times the abuse comes directly to your inbox of Facebook, of Twitter, of your email. So a lot of the time it is very pointed. And because we are in 2017 and we have, phones and the internet in our pockets and we're sort of connected 24/7, it does seem, a lot more targeted and personal than just someone writing a comment in the comment section. And also the idea that we should just get offline, especially because most cyberbullying happens to women, happens to people of color, happens to members of the LGBTQ community, is saying like, oh, don't participate here because, white straight men still dominate the internet and we don't want you here. And also, on top of that, why should they have to, give up their privacy to cater to bullies? And a lot of times people conduct business online, they have friends, family in other countries they want to stay connected to, so there are reasons they might need to use the internet, even if they're not trying to engage in any arguments or debates with harassing people.
And we have a comment right now from Rahman, sorry if I pronounce your name wrong, who says he's experiencing same things in Pakistan. That's really fascinating. And if you want to share with us some of your experiences with bullying or online bullying, please feel free to share those in the comments. We really appreciate hearing the thoughts from our community members. So some critics, when talking about anything that stops people from saying bad things about other people online might argue that a bill such as this one is just something that infringes upon an individual's right to free speech. What would you say to somebody who believes that?
Well, there has to be a line drawn between free speech versus hate speech and harassment, first of all. Why is your right to free speech, more important than the right of someone who you may not even know to feel safe in their own homes? If you think about a lot of what happened with Gamergate, which was a very famous controversy where female game critics were harassed and abused online, a lot of times these people would cyberstalk them and find their, home address and be like, I know where you live. And at that point, it's way beyond free speech, because you are, again, invading that person's privacy and doxing them, which means finding their private and personal info and posting it online for people to do with as they wish, which is another form of cyber harassment and cyberbullying. So, your right to free speech, the line has to be drawn somewhere when it comes down to, the safety and security of your fellow citizens.
Yeah, so where would that line have to be drawn? What's considered cyberbullying and online harassment, and what's considered just a normal critical or ideological disagreement?
Well, first of all, to have just, a debate or a disagreement, both parties have to consent to that discussion. So if someone isn't answering you and you're like, well, what's wrong? I just disagreed with them, and you continuously message them, that's harassing. If you post about them somewhere else and then a bunch of other people start to message them being like, well, why won't you talk to us? We just want to have a conversation. We just disagree with you. That's harassment. People aren't entitled, you're not entitled to somebody's time or energy, especially online. So, if they're not consenting to the debate, then it's not a debate. You're harassing them.
Yeah, so I think you've given us all a lot of really interesting things to think about today, Rafi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, so if you are sitting at home watching us, please share with us all of your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been cyberbullied, or do you have a friend or a child who's been cyberbullied? Do you feel like you've been wrongly accused of having been a cyberbully? Do you think legislation needs to be passed to protect people like Rafi or school children from cyberbullying online? Or do you think that's an infringement of a person's right to free speech? And do you think that it's okay for MTV to put a show up that would confront, or would have people who have been cyberbullied confront the people who have attacked them online? Share all of those thoughts with us in the comments. We always appreciate hearing what you care about, and share with us legislation that comes up that will change your communities and the rest of our communities. Thank you so much for joining us today. Bye.
Bye.